Hello and welcome to Adventures in Theater History. I'm your host, Peter Schmitz, and our theme music is by Christopher Mark Colucci. As we continue our exploration of modern Philadelphia theater history, today we begin what will be a 3-episode series on the Wilma Theater. You may remember that we introduced the Wilma Project back in episode 97 about small Philadelphia theater companies of the 1970s, but now we're finally going to talk about what happened next. And we'll begin laying the groundwork for this overall narrative with a conversation with Marcia Ferguson of the University of Pennsylvania, who wrote her PhD dissertation on the Wilma's story. I spoke with Marcia over Zoom back in November of 2024. We are here today with Marcia Ferguson. And Marcia is at the Department of English, senior lecturer in the Theater Arts program. She received her PhD from City University of New York in 2001. She has taught and directed professionally in theater, film, and television in Philadelphia, New York, Rome, and Tokyo. She's taught at Temple University, Swarthmore College, and Penn. She has worked as a director, as an actor, as a facilitator of so many conversations about Philadelphia theater. We are very honored to have her here on our program. Marcia Ferguson, welcome to Adventures in Theater History.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here. And I do need to say I am retired at the moment, but all of that is true.
You don't look retiring. You look very active and happy and involved.
And all of that is true as well. Thank you.
You're not just kicking back and sitting, putting your feet up and having a beer for the next few years.
I'm doing that too.
Oh,
Yeah, I definitely recommend that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I will look ahead to that. But we're here to talk today, especially about your 2001 dissertation and then subsequent book about the history of the Wilma Theater and the history of Jiri and Blanka Zizka, who came from Czechoslovakia in the 1970s and eventually joined the Wilma Project, an ongoing sort of a feminist or avant-garde theater collective, and then transformed it into the Wilma Theater starting in 1981, which is now one of the city's premier nonprofit performing organizations. Recently won a Tony Award for its work over the past few decades and gained a lot of national attention, especially because of its work with James Imes and his play Fat Ham, as well as many other works that Jiri and Blanka directed and created over the years. So at first, tell us a little about yourself in terms of your involvement with the theater in Philadelphia. Where do you enter this story?
I enter the story in the mid-'80s when I began a MFA in acting at Temple University in 1983, received the degree in 1986. And during that time, was quite busy both at the university performing, but also at the Wilma. So I was cast by Blanka in a role in Harry Ape. And this is, of course,
Eugene O'Neill play.
The O'Neill play. And
Right.
This is when the Wilma was a converted warehouse at what's now the Adrian, but at the time was the Wilma. And it
on
was
Sansom Street.
on Sansom Street in 21st.
West side of Center City, yeah.
It's on 21st, I think, and Sansom, but it was it was a black box and just a fabulous place for me to enter the world of sort of alternative, what was at the time extremely alternative theater in Philadelphia, of which there was not, of course, we've talked a little bit about the TLA and so forth, but the Wilma was a rare contribution to the scene at the time. And Blanka and Jiri were still very much new in the sense that they were still reveling in the freedom to produce whatever the heck they wanted to. And their experience under Soviet oppression in Prague was legible in their excitement about the work that we were doing at the Wilma, which is...
Did they ever reference it specifically, saying, we tried to work like this back when we were young, working in the early 70s in our small...
Not in so many words, but
Yeah.
sure, it was in the air. And also at the time, they were both extremely what I thought of as Eastern European, right? They wore black all the time and they
Yeah.
smoked and
Yeah.
they were just exotic to me, but also incredibly exciting theater artists to work with, to be around, and to learn from.
Well, they had
So
already
that was an
produced their
exciting
first
time.
production, Animal Farm, with the Wilma back in 1981, and then Yuri's production of George, speaking of that, George Orwell's 1984,
Right,
had
which,
gone on to the
yes.
Kennedy Center and had gone to New York and had brought them a lot of attention. And interesting that they had originally sort of dealt with the work of George Orwell. They had originally adapted famous works that were about socialist authoritarian oppression of artists and political spheres and had come up with real ways of dealing with that in a way that was very exciting to an American audience.
Well, to give you an idea of where that was coming from, Blanca told me I had a small role in 1984, had the role in The Hairy Ape, and then also I was directed by Yidi in Happy End, the Brecht.
Hmm.
So, the, but especially Animal Farm and other pieces by Orwell and others, they first encountered as samizdat, as these forbidden texts in Prague that were secretly passed from person to person.
Right. Blanca
So
said that
it was in,
you would get a copy of it that had been, typed on an old typewriter using, carbon paper, and that you would get
right.
it for a night. You're like, you have this for one
Yes.
night, read it now, and then you have to
Yes.
pass it on. Don't keep it in your house.
Yes, so there's this kind of excitement around these texts that was absolutely transferred into the theatrical moment with
Hmm.
them. And as an actor in their productions, it was just impossible not to get as excited as they were about the importance of what we were doing.
So you're just out of the Temple program. You decided to stay in Philadelphia and work in the Philadelphia area. You were you from Philadelphia originally?
No, I'm from New York originally,
Okay.
from New York City, but for various reasons, I went to college here. I went to Bryn Mawr. I was an English major there. I was trotted
Were
through
you? I didn't know that.
such a difficult
Okay.
and demanding and wonderful curriculum
So was my
of
mother.
literature.
Yeah.
Well, a Nausicaa taught to her.
Yeah.
I married a Philadelphia fellow, so I have been here for many years.
Well, so
And
how did that feel? As I have made a similar journey. So how did that feel to you coming from what was considered, the central part of the American theater world to what was not a prime theater city in the 1970s and 80s?
it was
Philadelphia
not at
was really
all.
not on the map.
No, I've often wondered what it would have been like if we'd had a pig iron or some sort of established
Or if the theater of living arts
places to go
had
and
succeeded. I mean, there
yeah,
was the Drama Guild and there was the beginnings of the Philadelphia Theater Company, but there was nothing
right. Well,
established.
as an art actor, as a theater artist, that work was really not my cup of tea, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. So I was delighted to answer your question. What was it like for me? I was totally excited. First of all, to be cast by Yidi and Blanca. I was also excited by the work I was doing at Temple University. So I had some
Who was your mentors
marvelous
there?
mentors there. Paul Berman, a director named Paul Berman, taught and directed me quite a bit there. I did a show called Restoration, which this is I'm patting myself on the back here, but I
Please
was
do.
nominated for a Barrymore for that show, which I think might have been the first because I remember
You mentioned that, and I'm
it
trying to
was
find because I cannot find any mention of the Barrymores before the 1990s in the
I know. I
paper.
think
Who
it was
was
the
running
very
that?
first iteration. I have no idea.
Oh,
But
okay.
someone came to my dressing room and said, "Hey, you've been nominated for Bear." And I said, "What is that?" I had no
It was
idea.
not the Charlotte Cushman Award because the Charlotte Cushman Company was
No,
giving things. No, I'm going to need to
no.
find out
It's
more
very
about that.
mysterious to me too, but I am on a list somewhere, so my eyes
Okay.
have
All right.
have
I believe you. I believe
have
you. I'm just obviously I need to go elsewhere in the
I'm
archives.
I'm not lying.
Okay.
But anyway, the quality of the work there was really high at Temple at the time, and we did some really exciting off the beaten path kinds of productions. And so that was really my training, and that was my preference.
Hmm.
So I did gravitate towards that work. And my timing was a little off in the sense that, my goodness, how great it would have been if the Idiopathic Radiculopathy Consortium was up and running when I was a young actress, or other places that we know of now as wonderful spots for alternative work.
Right, but
But
what
at
we're
the
talking this
time,
period
the
now, the
Wilma was
Wilma is
it.
laying
It was
laying the
it.
ground for that the
They
later compounds to
are.
exist. That could pig iron
Exactly.
or idiopathic have existed if the Wilma had not done this work first, if it had not made an
Precisely.
audience for this type of theater.
Precisely. So it was wonderful. In answer to your question, it was quite exciting. And there was a moment when we had a showcase in New York after I got the MFA. And I did talk to a lot of agents, and there was some interest. And for a minute, I thought, oh, we'll just move to New York and this will be what I do. And then I moved to Japan for a year, somewhat unexpectedly. And that's when I started doing, and I wound up there for 2 years and wound up doing some acting in
Was
Tokyo.
it
And
through
by the
Temple
time
Japan or was it
it was through
something else?
Temple, Japan.
Okay.
And by the time I came back, I had changed and my goals had changed and things, so I no longer
Did you work
was
with
after
avant-garde
that.
theater in Japan? Because there was so many amazing theater artists in Tokyo at the time.
No, I had the great opportunity to sit in on rehearsals
Hmm.
for traditional Japanese theater, for bunraku, for kabuki,
Hmm.
and I was just completely taken. But I myself did television
I
and
see.
commercial work, your run-of-the-mill kind of stuff, which was great. I mean, I made some money and
They pay well.
kept my hand. They did kept my
Yeah.
hand in. At the time, in the mid '80s, there
Hmm.
weren't a lot of
Western
white
actors.
blonde people walking
Right.
around in Tokyo. There weren't, I mean, now it's a completely different story. It was
Yes.
a very different situation back then. So that was great. I enjoyed that. But by the time I returned, my interest really had turned to directing and to teaching. So I really put the acting career on kind of the back burner.
Okay.
And
You ended up, when did you start working at the University of Pennsylvania?
1999. So
Okay.
I went during the 90s, I went back and got a PhD in New York at CUNY, at City University of New York Graduate Center. So, and did various
And
things
you
here and
wrote your
there.
PhD. This is the dissertation that you have
Indeed,
about the
indeed.
Wilma.
That's
So
exactly.
why did
So
you, when you went to your dissertation committee and said, "Oh, well, I'm going to talk about the Wilma," did they say, "What's the Wilma?" Or were they
no, not at
excited?
all. No,
Okay.
indeed. Actually, my committee head, a wonderful scholar named Dan Gerald, came to me with the idea. He was the one that said, here's what you should do. I had dreams of writing about French Renaissance tapestries as performative. And like I had this whole elaborate and overly complicated theoretical stance on all of this that was a bit, well, let me
This
say,
is what graduate students do.
it
Yeah.
would have taken me twice as long to finish the degree.
Right.
But no, it was a great idea. As soon as I heard Dan say, because Dan was an expert in Eastern European theater generally,
Right.
and he was a huge fan of the Wilma and of the Zizkas. And he said, you really need to write about, you've had experience with these people. You need to interview them and compile information and contribute that as scholarship. So that's what I wound up doing. And that's how the idea came about.
So you ended up being one of the first people to really document in a meticulous way what the Wilma was doing, because it seems to me, looking back, the Ziskas themselves have not really been interested in archival work and document and holding on to the past and creating a searchable body of work. They're always about what's going into their next show. The past is past and they're moving on.
They were very kind to me when I approached them about this because I don't
Hmm.
think it's something they particularly were interested in. But my main focus was on intercultural theater at the time. I was very
Hmm.
fascinated by the way their experiences and their practices and techniques that they learned from Grotowski and other folks in Eastern Europe kind of braided with American theater practices in Philadelphia,
Hmm.
with American audiences in particular. I have a chapter on the audience. and also with the landscape of what was happening economically in Philadelphia, which was a post-industrial city. It was like classically depressed, the way so many such cities were at the time, especially in the late 70s, and how their theater truly invigorated the sort of soft economy of tourism, et cetera, that Ed Rendell then built on when he proposed and had built this avenue of the arts concept. And eventually, by dint of incredible, excruciating work on their part, Jiri and Blanka got together the funding, in part, the funding for the marvelous theater that sits on Spruce and Broad today.
Right. Now, so when they built this theater in 1996, it was the first theater, certainly, that had been built along Broad Street and that central area since the Forest Theater had been built back in the late 1920s.
Yeah, I believe it was the first purpose-built theater in at least 60 years, but perhaps more.
But by the 1980s, the Locust is gone. But the Wilma Theater is really carving out a space that has not existed before. It's not going to an established educational institution. It's not going back to historical walls of the Walnut Street Theater. It's not using these commercial houses that were built in the early 20th century. It's really creating a whole new landscape. So what did that, as a Philadelphia theater artist in the 1980s, what was the feeling around that in terms of creating the audience that you write about so much?
Well, theater. So there was theater in Philadelphia.
Sure.
I personally was an audience member at all of those places, an eager and appreciative audience member. I really remember fondly Freedom Theater was a really special place. I certainly went to the Drama Guild, and so I was really an audience member for a lot of that. I was not a participant. Really, my interests as an artist were smaller alternative practices, and those were the folks that I was drawn to work with. And pretty quickly, as I said, my focus, I was a niche person. I was not in it to win it in any sense. So I was an appreciative audience at those stages, but I was not a participant. So for me, what that landscape was, that was the world of possibility of seeing theater in Philadelphia.
Right.
But like I said, not all of it was, frankly, to my taste. And to this day, not all of it is to my taste either. The more mainstream offerings, the musicals that come and go, sometimes I love them. I saw Hamilton twice. So.
Sure.
But it's not where I'm generally going to be drawn in.
Right. Let's finish our conversation today with talking about the Philadelphia audience, and then I'm going to come back and grab you again and talk specifically about the Wilma. But for the rest of our talk today, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about things that you specifically talk about, the Philadelphia audience, which, as I continue to look into the subject, seems to me to be the continuing element that allows theater to eventually thrive and exist in its modern form in the city of Philadelphia. The engaged audience, if you look at descriptions of theater tours that come through Philadelphia in the early 20th century, they're like, oh, and then we went to Philadelphia, and the people there were just crazy, as they always are. They were jamming the theaters. They knew all the stars. They remembered them from early on in their careers. They come back to see them again. The Philly audience is great. And this, if you look at the engagement in amateur theatrical groups throughout the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, there's so much community organizations. Some of them become nonprofit theaters. I mean, the Drama Guild was originally just a small community theater that sort of stepped up when the TLA went bust and becomes professional, right? So there's this whole engagement and excitement about theater in Philadelphia that was there when the Zizkas arrived in the 1970s. And what do you see as the nature of the Philadelphia audience, and how did the Wilma project and then the Wilma Theater begin to transform and shape and carve out new territory there?
Well, it's such a great question, and it's such an interesting history to me. And I'm in no way claiming to be an expert, by the way. I'm sure you know way more than I do, Peter, at this point.
No,
You've done
I'm claiming
so
you as an
much
expert. That's why
research
I'm
about
talking
it.
to you. No, because I've just been reading your work on this, and you talk about the Philadelphia audience.
I do. I really feel one of the things that they did so cleverly was to join a mainstream audience that already existed in Philadelphia, as you quite rightly point out. And they somehow made them feel at home in this rather wildly alternative theatrical space. I think there was a sense of excitement around the work, but also there was no, at least folks that were open enough to go to alternative theater in the first place, were
Mhm.
really made to feel welcome. Blanka and Jiri are completely charming individuals, or they were. And there was, I don't know if you recall, or maybe you weren't around for this, but after every performance, there would be, and Blanka hated doing this, but she was excellent at it, a personal plea for help with the funding of the theater. And she was so lovely and charming, and she was irresistible. And I remember, this was something that she really hated doing, but she had to do it for them to exist. But I think something like that, where the artistic director is a person in the mind and upfront and speaking directly to the audience as potential funders. And now it's something that's done
Mhm.
often, all the time. But there's something about the way Blanca did it.
Mhm.
And maybe it was her accent, or maybe it was her demeanor, or maybe it was her appealing way of doing it. But for whatever reason, that I think that was actually something that made people feel like I'm in a special place and I'm going to help these people because what they're doing is important. And these are folks, that were attending much bigger houses in more mainstream venues and seeing more mainstream work. And recall that at the time, there really weren't that many options for seeing alternative work and seeing it done in an alternative way, more
Right.
importantly, because, there were certainly daring choices at times, within the limits of what you can do with a subscription audience, but at places like the Walnut or at the Annenberg,
Right.
the Wilma at the time was just coming at it from a different place, from a passion, from a passionate need to express theatrically certain political and social truths
Right.
that drove the work.
So
And
how does this tie in
that was just different.
with what eventually happens in the 1990s with the election of Ed Rendell and a certain mindset of the people that came in his administration that Philadelphia could revive its fortunes? Philadelphia's at a very low point during the
Yes, indeed.
1980s
Yes, indeed.
in terms of its population, in terms of its economy, in terms of its national reputation. And there was a ongoing feeling that the arts are the way for especially older industrialized cities to now begin to revitalize and rebrand themselves. And the long-standing idea of the Avenue of the Arts, which interestingly, as I discovered, was almost the Ben Franklin Parkway, where the museums all are. They were going to call that the
Mm.
Avenue of the Arts. That was the first idea.
Okay.
Then it shifted to
That makes
Broad Street.
sense.
Well,
Uh-huh.
there was lots
Uh-huh.
of art there, right? But
Right.
then they said, what if the arts is the performing arts? And they noticed the huge Academy of Music, and they noticed, that the Schubert, then Merriam Theater, they noticed that there was now a place called the University of the Arts. Why did the Wilma suit the needs of this movement? What was the Wilma, this avant-garde theater? Why does this suddenly get the first shot at actually building a house along this avenue?
Well, I hate to keep coming back to what I keep saying, but I do think that that's why. They were determinedly themselves. They had a very distinct outline and
Mhm.
reputation. I would say because of the nature of the work, they were recognizable, extremely recognizable, and because of the uniqueness of what they did at the time. And recall, this is well before IRC, well before Pig Iron,
Mhm.
before any of those, before the Arden, etc. They were really quite singular. And also, as I do believe I say, it's been a while since I've been looking at this book, by
Right.
the way, Peter. So you know it more closely perhaps than I do at the moment. But I do remember that the managing director at the time, who was Teresa Eyring,
Right.
she said that the audience for the Wilma was resilient because Yidi and Blanca have always gone at it that way. They expect the audience to be able to receive challenging productions and to make sense of things. And also that the theater has consequently built muscle in the audience.
Muscle is such a great word that
Yes,
because the ongoing then and now, as I see, the reputation of the Wilma has been that some of the stuff they do may not work. They may try something really crazy, and
exactly.
the audience goes away. I don't know what the heck that was. That was
Exactly.
an hour of my life I wish I had back. But the institution doesn't get abandoned. What happened at times at other theaters
Exactly.
was if you had a run of shows which didn't appeal to the audience, subscriptions would be canceled, funders would walk away, and as it happened to the Drama Guild, suddenly you're in a death spiral crisis. Certainly, we saw it happen with the Theater of Living Arts when everyone walks away after Andre Gregory and Tom Bissinger do some wild and crazy, innovative stuff, but it doesn't please a lot of the audience, doesn't please the
Mhm.
funders, and they cannot recover from that bad odor that's left in the air after trying something wild, not working. Happens in the arts. The Wilma does that occasionally too, but the people don't walk away.
Right. The people have learned to expect the unexpected at the Wilma. So
Right.
they go in knowing that it's entirely possible that they'll be alienated. But no matter what, I mean, at the time, Peter, it was something to talk about at dinner parties too. Like they were
Yeah.
exciting, they were doing exciting topical things.
Right.
And they were an exciting topical couple also. They were an interesting pair. And like I said, they had a personal charm that I think added something that these other theaters did not have. And I do think that, I mean, this audience was largely college educated, an older audience, and it wasn't especially challenging company, and they were especially loyal to it. And, artistic merit above popularity, these kinds of questions dog a lot of alternative theaters. But I do think that they had something, not just that they were from Prague and that they had, suffered an
Mm.
extreme deprivation of artistic freedom.
Right. But then
Um,
I noticed, and we'll end with this, our talk for today. There's a passage I just came across in your book, was that by, the early 1990s, the situation back home in Prague had completely changed.
oh,
Right?
yes,
Yeah, there was the
right.
fall of
Yes.
the whole all the series of communist regimes throughout Eastern Europe. There's a
Hmm.
new Václav Havel, their old pal, becomes the
Hmm.
president of
Right. Yeah.
Czechoslovakia and later the Czech Republic when the two halves of that country split apart. And they could go back if they wanted, if that was what, but by this point, by the 1990s, they're saying, no, I belong here. I belong
Mhm.
in Philadelphia. He says, I'm not. Yuri had some quote that he said, I'm Czech American. You can call me Czech American. It's as good a label as any, but I'm not particularly interested in labels.
Mhm.
But he says, the world that I grew up in, this extremely repressive regime in which the extremely significant, I mean, anything you said that was truth was enormous in a atmosphere like that. That doesn't exist anymore. Now Prague is another theatrical marketplace just like the one I'm in. And I've spent the last 20 years building this particular institution here, and this is where I belong. This is where my work will be in the future. There was no thought that, okay, I'm
Mhm.
done here. I'm not going to go back to my roots. No, I've built a life and a world and an audience here. I will stay. And they both
Mhm.
felt that.
Mhm. Lucky for us.
Yes, yes. Well, Marcia, thank you so much. We're going to hold our conversation there, and then we'll come back with a part two later to talk specifically about the journey of the Wilma Theater and special surprise. You have given me earlier in this conversation, before we began recording, some historic recordings of Blanka, and I've been able to locate some historical interviews with Jiri as well. So we want to bring their voices into the room and not just talk about them, allow
Wonderful.
them to speak. All right, but
Great
thank you
idea.
so much for joining us today on Adventures in Theater History, and to be continued in this conversation is what we'll say now. So, Marcia Ferguson, thank you so much for joining us, and we will come back to this conversation again soon.
My pleasure.